Chào mừng quý vị quay trở lại với phần tiếp theo của chương trình Tôi và Việt Nam trên kênh truyền hình FBNC với cuộc trò chuyện cùng giáo sư Clifford J.Shultz, giáo sư marketing đến từ Đại học Loyola University Chicago. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So in terms of macro marketing, what else are you working on right now in Vietnam?
One of the longitudinal studies I have here that I've greatly enjoyed because it's involved a lot of Vietnamese over years is the evolution of the coffee industry.
Nice. Coffee.
Coffee, of course.
It's a big one.
It's a big one in Vietnam. Interestingly, perhaps a lot of people don't know this, coffee is not indigenous to Vietnam. It was brought in some centuries ago. And now, after Doi Moi, Vietnamese have realized that this is a commodity at which Vietnamese could be quite good in producing and exporting. And that's sort of the good news and the bad news. The good news is Vietnam was extraordinarily good and became one of the top 2 or 3 producers and exporters in the world. The potential bad news is they were so good at it that they drove down global prices. And so they were at the mercy of commodity pricing. And it was a real dilemma for them. So I was fortunate to have some graduate students from Vietnam come work with me in the US, and we would go back and forth to Dock Lock and places and study production, distribution, processing, and most importantly, value added and branding. And the perhaps obvious discovery, if you're a marketing professor, is if you're in the commodity business, you are at the mercy of what's happening in global commodities. Prices are driven down. There's no differentiation. Margins are going to be very, very low. But if you're in the branded end of that particular business, whether you're, to name a few names that Vietnamese would know very well, Trung Nguyen, Highlands, Phuc Lom, etc., that's where the margins actually come from. That's where customer loyalties come from.
When you have a bigger brand.
Exactly. Yeah. That's where if you export your product to the US or Singapore or Japan, people will resonate toward that brand and the imagery and the quality found in it. And that's where fortunes are made.
And not just coffee, other product as well. We don't have any brand yet.
Exactly. And that's a real pet interest of mine here, is to help Vietnamese to understand that you need to begin to move up. And I think Vietnamese clearly do understand this. It's a question of how to do it rather than to do it. How do we move up the value chain? How do we come up with the next Samsung or the next
Starbucks,
next Apple, Starbucks? And I think Vietnam, one of the reasons I enjoy working in Vietnam is Vietnam have the intelligence, the drive, the business acumen to get into that space. And that's what I spend a lot of my time here doing, is helping Vietnamese to do that.
What's missing here from your observation?
Well, I think there are a number of issues. Capital is always a challenge for any entrepreneur or any organization, some money. And Vietnamese are seemingly intrinsically very good entrepreneurs. I'm amazed that wherever I go in Vietnam, there's a coffee shop, there's a fix-it shop, there's a TV shop. But transitioning from that mom and pop operation to a large multinational company or even a small to medium-sized enterprise is difficult. That requires education. That requires having the wherewithal, having the tool set to be able to compete in a global economy. And so another place where I'm allocating a lot of my time and energy, and have been, frankly, for over 2 decades, is with the universities and the educational systems, my colleagues in business schools and schools of management here, to train the next generation of Vietnamese business leaders so that they can not only run mom and pop shops, but they can compete toe-to-toe with some of the largest multinationals in the world.
The overseas market, like you mentioned, is very competitive. So how do you looking for partners? How do you convince them?
Well, there are trade shows. I would recommend, if you're interested in the U.S. market, maybe talking to folks at AmCham here, talking to people in the commercial attaché of the consulate here or in the embassy in Hanoi. You know, there are partners here. I bring actually a group of MBA students here every year, and we do tours of factories and touristic sites and so forth and talk to people. And I've had some of those folks say, you know, Professor, I wouldn't mind actually getting in business here. And these are hard-charging people with entrepreneurial spirit. Maybe that's the ticket to get them involved in these sorts of projects.
Yeah. So how do they apply any macro marketing practices to the business if they want to go overseas?
Coffee presents some extraordinary opportunities to do that. So consumers are becoming, global consumers are becoming increasingly conscious of the entire value or supply chain from how the coffee was grown, where it was grown, how the workers were treated on the coffee growing areas, how it's handled through a value chain, where it's stored, how it's presented in the coffee retailer. And every one of those stops across that channel has an opportunity for thoughtful macro marketer engagement. So, is the water clean? Are the plants sustainable? Do they not use pesticides? Are we creating jobs where people get fair wages? These are all macro marketing concerns.
Those are the messages of macro marketing, doing something good for the society, right?
Exactly. And the important message there is not simply to do something good for society, but that there's actually good business in doing good things for society.
People talk about content marketing nowadays, and the messages doing something good for the society, making a social impact. It is something that you should focus when you do content marketing.
You should. However, already, and not surprisingly perhaps, consumers have gotten very cynical when they hear words like sustainability.
Have or had enough with that, right?
Yeah, well, I think they've grown cynical. Sustainability. Our products are green, right? Another word that's
too much of that.
Right. So my point is, we want people to do that, but we really want them to do that. So
not just say.
They need to be able to demonstrate that they are, not using pesticides, that they are responsible, and make their organization transparent so that the consumer can verify, is this really a sustainable product? Are people being treated fairly across the value chain? That's vital. Transparency becomes increasingly important, especially in an age of the cell phone, right? So a coffee grower might have a cell phone and he or she could say, look, I'm not being treated particularly well here, or this is the toxin that's being put on the coffee. So you need to be honest, you need to be transparent, you need to be credible.
Thank you. We'll come back with that after a short break. Thank you so much. Thưa quý vị, vừa rồi là những chia sẻ của giáo sư Clifford J.Shultz, giáo sư marketing đến từ trường Đại học Loyola University Chicago, Hoa Kỳ. Chúng tôi sẽ còn quay trở lại trong phần cuối của chương trình ngày hôm nay.